I still remember that evening clearly. The living room was softly lit, the television was on, but no one was really watching it. We were all seated around the dining table, my parents, my older sister, and me. It was an ordinary family moment, the kind that happens 100 times. Yet somehow, I would carry this one with me forever. My sister sat across from me, confident and perfectly put together, just as she always was. She was talking excitedly about her new house, its wide living room, imported furniture, marble floors, and the balcony view overlooking the city. My parents listened with proud smiles, nodding along, interrupting only to praise her choices. "You really have great taste," my mother said warmly. "Yes, a home should be like this," my father added with satisfaction. I stayed quiet. I usually did. A plate of food sat in front of me, untouched. My appetite had disappeared somewhere between her words and their admiration. I listened as if from a distance, hearing about a life that felt impossibly far from my own. I was used to this feeling. Comparison had been a part of my life for as long as I could remember. Growing up, it was always the same. "Your sister is smarter. Look at her results. Why can't you be like that? She has a bright future." And me? I was never bad. Just never exceptional. Then my mother looked at me and laughed lightly, not unkindly, but carelessly. "So, when are you going to buy your own house?" she asked. "You should learn something from your sister." I forced a small smile. Crying at the dinner table never changes anything. My father lifted his teacup and said, almost jokingly, but far too easily, "Honestly, you'll never have a house like your sister's." The words were wrapped in laughter, but they landed straight in my chest. A brief chuckle filled the room. My sister glanced at me with a polite smile, not cruel, not loving either. Just certain. Certain that my father was right. In that moment, I felt myself shrink. It was as if everything I was, every effort, every quiet dream, every unseen struggle, suddenly meant nothing. I didn't respond. I couldn't. If I spoke, my voice would have trembled, and I refused to look weak in front of them. That night, when I returned to my small rented room, I slipped off my shoes and sat on the floor. The ticking clock on the wall sounded unbearably loud. The silence pressed in on me, heavy and unforgiving. Maybe they're right, I thought. Maybe I really am not meant for more. I closed my eyes, but the image of my sister's house appeared, bright walls, shining floors, and my parents' proud faces standing inside it. And what did I have? A tiny room, an old wardrobe, and a heart constantly trying to convince itself that someday things would change. But that night, something else stirred beneath the pain. Anger. And beneath that anger, a single question. Was this really all I was capable of? No one saw my exhaustion after long days. No one noticed the dreams I kept to myself. No one acknowledged the effort I poured into surviving quietly. And sitting there in the dark, I made a promise, not out loud, not dramatically, but deep within myself. I won't answer them with words. I'll answer them with my life. I didn't know how I would do it. I didn't know when. I didn't even know if I could. But I knew one thing for certain. From that night on, I would no longer live just to be compared. After that night, nothing visibly changed. The same family conversations continued. The same smiles. The same casual remarks. But inside me, something had shifted. Quietly, invisibly. I went back to my routine. Waking up early, commuting through crowded streets, working long hours, and returning to my small rented place where silence waited for me like an old friend. Every family gathering felt the same. My sister would arrive with stories, new furniture, upgrades to her house, plans for renovations. Someone would always ask about the curtains, the lighting, the latest decor trend she had followed. My parents listened with glowing pride, their eyes shining as if her success belonged entirely to them. And maybe it did. I would sit on the edge of the conversation, holding a cup of tea that slowly went cold in my hands. When someone asked me how I was doing, the question was usually followed by silence before I could answer. As if no one expected much anyway. "I'm fine," I'd say. Fine became my safest word. No one asked about my exhaustion. No one noticed how carefully I budgeted every month, how I skipped dinners out, how I walked past things I wanted, because survival came first. My life wasn't glamorous enough to be discussed. Sometimes my mother would sigh and say, "Your sister really planned her life well." Sometimes my father would add, "You should be practical like her." They never meant to hurt me. Or maybe they did, but in a way that felt normal to them. To them, comparison was motivation. To me, it felt like being erased. At night, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling of my tiny room. The paint was chipped in one corner. The light flickered if I left it on too long. Outside, I could hear traffic and distant laughter from neighbors who seemed to belong somewhere. I wondered when I had started feeling like I didn't. Scrolling through social media didn't help. Pictures of my sister's house would appear, carefully framed shots of her living room, captions filled with gratitude and pride. Friends and relatives commented with hearts and praise. "Dream home. So proud of you. Living the life." I double-tapped the photo and put my phone face down, as if that could quiet the ache. Sometimes I asked myself if something was wrong with me. Why did I always feel one step behind? Why did my best never seem good enough? I replayed my parents' words over and over in my mind, each time believing them a little more. "You'll never have a house like your sister's." Maybe I won't, I thought. Maybe I wasn't meant to. But then, in moments when I thought no one was watching, I would catch myself imagining a different life. Not bigger, not louder, but mine. A place where I could breathe. A space that reflected who I was, not who I was compared to. Those thoughts scared me. Because hope is dangerous when you've been taught not to expect much. So I buried them. I smiled politely. I congratulated my sister. I nodded when my parents spoke about success as if it had only one definition. And I continued living in her shadow, convincing myself that this was all I deserved. But deep down, something refused to stay quiet. A voice I barely recognized whispered, "Just because they don't see you, doesn't mean you are invisible." I didn't know it yet, but this was the phase where my story was being written in silence, where strength was forming without applause, and where patience was slowly turning into resolve. They thought I had accepted my place. They were wrong. The decision didn't come in a dramatic moment. There was no shouting, no tears in front of anyone, no grand declaration that my life was about to change. It came quietly, on an ordinary night, when I was sitting alone on my bed, counting the days backward instead of forward. I had just returned from work, my feet aching, my mind heavy. I dropped my bag by the door and stared at it for a long moment, as if it belonged to someone else. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp on the side table. Outside, the city moved on without me. Cars passing, voices drifting through open windows, life continuing. I felt stuck. Not lost. Not broken. Just stuck. I opened my phone and saw a message from my mother. A simple one. "Your sister is thinking of renovating the kitchen. She has such good planning." I read it twice. Then I locked the screen and placed the phone face down. Something in me hardened, not into anger, but into clarity. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had always avoided. What if I stopped trying to be seen by them? What if I stopped explaining myself, defending my choices, hoping for approval that never came? What if I build something without announcing it, without asking permission to dream? That thought felt strange and powerful. I stood up and looked around my room. The worn curtains, the uneven shelf, the suitcase tucked under the bed that held everything important to me. This place wasn't much, but it was honest. It was mine. And for the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of it. I sat down again and took out a notebook I had bought months ago but never used. Its pages were still blank, waiting patiently. I opened it and stared at the first page, my pen hovering uncertainly. Then I wrote one sentence. "I don't need to prove myself to anyone, but I will build something for myself." My hand trembled as I wrote it. Not because I doubted the words, but because they felt dangerous. Once written, I couldn't pretend I hadn't thought them. Once acknowledged, I couldn't go back to being passive. That night, I didn't create a perfect plan. I didn't suddenly know all the answers. I just listed what I could control.
My time.
My effort. My focus. I crossed out distractions. I crossed out expectations that weren't mine. I crossed out the need to be compared. For the first time, my sister wasn't part of the picture. Neither were my parents.
It was just me.
I decided I wouldn't talk about my goals anymore. I wouldn't hint. I wouldn't seek validation. Every time I had shared an idea before, it had been met with doubt, advice I didn't ask for, or quiet disbelief. This time, I chose silence. Silence became my shield. I worked during the day and learned at night. I read when others slept. I saved money in small, almost invisible ways. No new clothes. No impulsive purchases. No explaining why I said no to outings. When people asked what I was up to, I smiled and said, "Just working." It was the truth. Just not the whole one. Some nights were harder than others. Doubt crept in quietly, asking uncomfortable questions. What if they're right? What if I fail? What if I try and still end up with nothing? But I learned something important during those nights. Fear loses power when no one hears it.
So I kept going.
No announcements. No applause. No witnesses. Just progress, slow and unremarkable to the outside world, but life-changing to me. They thought I was simply getting by. They had no idea I had made the most important decision of my life. From the outside, my life looked ordinary. I went to work. I paid my bills. I showed up to family events when I had to. I smiled when it was expected of me. Nothing about me suggested ambition, or change, or quiet rebellion. And that was exactly how I wanted it. What no one saw were the hours that stretched long after midnight. The way I sat at my small table, shoulders tense, eyes burning from exhaustion, pushing myself to learn things I was never taught. What no one noticed was how often I chose sleep over comfort and discipline over ease. Every morning began the same way. The alarm rang too early. I lay still for a few seconds, gathering the strength to move, reminding myself why I couldn't give up. Then I stood, got dressed, and stepped into a world that expected nothing extraordinary from me. That expectation hurt, but it also freed me. I took on extra work whenever I could. I stayed late when others left. I accepted tasks that didn't come with recognition, only responsibility. My body was tired, but my mind was awake in a way it had never been before. At night, when the city slowed down, my real work began. I studied. I researched. I failed quietly and tried again. There were nights I stared at my screen, fighting tears, wondering if I was wasting time chasing a version of myself that didn't exist. But each time doubt rose, I remembered my father's words, spoken so casually, so confidently. "You'll never have a house like your sister's." I didn't use them as fuel at first. They hurt too much for that. Instead, they became a reminder of what it felt like to be underestimated. And I promised myself I would never forget that feeling. Money was always tight. I counted every expense carefully, sometimes choosing between small comforts and long-term goals. I walked instead of taking transport. I cooked simple meals, repeating the same dishes until I got tired of them. I wore clothes longer than I should have, convincing myself that appearances didn't matter right now. Some nights, loneliness hit harder than exhaustion. I watched others celebrate milestones, promotions, engagements, housewarmings, while I remained invisible. I was never the one people worried about or admired. I existed somewhere in between, forgotten and unremarkable. But in that quiet space, something unexpected happened. I began to trust myself. Each small achievement, no matter how minor, felt personal. No one applauded. No one noticed. But I noticed. I started seeing progress where others saw nothing. Family calls still came. My mother would ask, "Everything okay?" I'd answer, "Yes." My sister would mention another upgrade to her home. I'd listen politely. No one ever asked if I was tired. No one wondered how I was managing. And slowly, I stopped wishing they would. There were nights when I broke down alone, sitting on the floor, hands over my face, tears soaking into the carpet. Not because I wanted to quit, but because carrying everything silently was heavy. Still, I didn't stop. Because this struggle was mine. And for the first time, I wasn't ashamed of how hard it was. They thought I was standing still. In reality, I was building strength they would never understand. I didn't find out all at once. The truth came to me in pieces, small, careless comments dropped into conversations, details no one thought I would notice. At first, I ignored them. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was being sensitive. But patterns don't lie. One afternoon, I was visiting my parents when my mother casually mentioned, "We helped your sister a little when she was buying the house. You know, just to make things easier for her." She said it like it was nothing. Like it was obvious. Like it didn't change anything. My chest tightened, but I stayed quiet. Later, my father added another detail, how they had covered part of the down payment, how they had stepped in when renovations went over budget. They spoke proudly, as if it were proof of good parenting. I nodded. I smiled. Inside, something cracked. It wasn't the money that hurt the most. It was the realization. I had never been offered that help. Never been asked if I needed it. Never been considered a risk worth investing in. All those years I had blamed myself, thinking I was slower, weaker, less capable. All those nights I wondered why my life felt harder than it should. And suddenly it made sense. We hadn't started from the same place. I walked home that day feeling strangely hollow. The streets felt louder, the sky heavier. Every step echoed with thoughts I couldn't silence. So this is why her path was smoother. This is why failure never touched her the way it touched me. For a moment, bitterness rose sharply in my throat. I imagined confronting them, asking why, demanding fairness, listing every sacrifice I had made alone. But I didn't, because somewhere between anger and sadness, a calmer truth settled in. They had made their choice, and I could make mine. That night, I allowed myself to grieve, not just the lack of support, but the illusion I had held on to. The belief that someday they would see me the way they saw her. That someday I would be chosen too. I cried for the version of myself who kept waiting. Then I wiped my face and stood up. Something had changed. The pain was still there, but it had sharpened into focus. I no longer wanted their approval. I no longer needed fairness from them. What I needed was independence, real, undeniable independence. If I succeeded now, it would be mine alone. If I failed, it would still be mine to carry. And strangely, that thought felt empowering. I rewrote my goals that night, not bigger, not louder, just clearer. I stopped imagining success as a reaction to them. I stopped picturing their regret as the ending. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. This was about proving myself right. They had given my sister a foundation. I would build my own, brick by brick, without shortcuts, without safety nets. The betrayal had hurt, but it had also freed me, because now I knew exactly where I stood, and exactly where I was going. The turning point didn't announce itself. There was no sudden miracle, no dramatic phone call, no overnight success. It arrived quietly, disguised as exhaustion, one of those moments when you realize you can't keep living the same way and survive. I remember sitting at my desk late one night, staring at my screen without really seeing it. My body was tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. My mind felt stretched thin, like a wire pulled too tight for too long. And for the first time, I admitted something to myself. Working harder isn't enough anymore. That thought scared me, because hard work had always been my answer. When things went wrong, I worked more. When I felt small, I pushed harder. But now I understood. I wasn't just tired. I was stuck in effort without direction. So I stopped. Not quitting. Not giving up. Just pausing. I took a step back and looked honestly at my life. At where my money came from. At where it went. At what skills I had been building without realizing it. Patterns began to emerge. Strengths I had dismissed. Opportunities one had ignored because they didn't look safe. For the first time, I allowed myself to think strategically. I asked better questions. What if I focused on one thing instead of 10? What if I stopped trading time for money and started building something that could grow? What if I trusted myself enough to take a calculated risk? The idea didn't feel bold at first. It felt uncomfortable. It meant choosing uncertainty over routine, responsibility over excuses. It meant failing publicly instead of struggling quietly. I was terrified. But beneath that fear was something new: belief. Not loud confidence. Not arrogance. Just a steady inner knowing that I was capable of more than survival. I started small. I invested carefully. Time first, then money I could afford to lose. I made mistakes, corrected them, learned faster than I ever had before. Every setback taught me something specific. Every small win felt earned in a way nothing ever had. And slowly, things began to shift. I noticed it in subtle ways at first. Bills felt less overwhelming. Savings stopped disappearing as quickly. For the first time, I wasn't just managing money. I was directing it.
My posture changed.
My voice steadied. My fear lost its grip. People around me noticed before my family did. A colleague asked how I seemed so focused lately. A friend commented that I looked different, calmer, stronger. I smiled and said nothing, because this part of the journey was still mine alone. The real turning point came one evening when I checked my account and realized something simple but powerful. I was no longer afraid of the future. Not because everything was perfect, but because I finally trusted myself to handle whatever came next. That night, I stood by the window of my small room and looked out at the city lights. For the first time, they didn't feel distant or unattainable. They felt possible. I thought of my parents. I thought of my sister's house. And surprisingly, there was no bitterness left. Just clarity. I wasn't chasing their version of success anymore. I was creating my own. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Once things started to stabilize, I became even quieter. Not because I was hiding something, but because I had learned the value of protecting what was growing. Dreams, I realized, don't need to be shared to be real. Some things thrive best away from opinions, away from doubt, away from unnecessary noise. I stopped explaining my choices altogether. When my parents asked about work, I said, "It's going well." When friends asked about plans, I smiled and said, "I'm figuring things out." Both were true. Behind that simplicity was a level of focus I had never known before. I tracked every decision carefully. I planned months ahead. I learned how to think long-term, how to delay gratification without resentment. And then, quietly, I did something I never imagined I'd do so soon. I started planning a home. Not a house meant to impress anyone. Not something designed for approval or comparison. But a place that felt like safety. Like peace. Like a reward for every night I had cried in silence and still shown up the next day. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my sister. I barely told anyone at all. I visited sites alone. I spoke to agents with calm confidence I didn't know I possessed. I asked questions I had once been afraid to ask. Each answer made the dream feel more solid, more real. Every step felt surreal. There were moments when doubt tried to return, standing in empty spaces, imagining walls that didn't exist yet. I wondered if I was reaching too far, if I was tempting fate. But then I remembered the girl sitting on the floor of her rented room, holding back tears. And I kept going. I saved deliberately. I negotiated carefully. I made choices based on sustainability, not ego. No shortcuts. No pressure to rush. Just steady movement forward. At night, I imagined simple things. Morning light through a window. A quiet cup of coffee in my own space. A door I could close and open whenever I wanted. Those thoughts grounded me more than luxury ever could. From the outside, my life still looked modest. I didn't post updates. I didn't hint at progress. I let people assume whatever they wanted. They assumed I was comfortable being average. They had no idea I was building something that belonged entirely to me. Every document signed felt like a promise kept to myself. Every small milestone reminded me that growth doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. I wasn't trying to match my sister's life. I was creating a place where I could finally feel whole. And soon, very soon, the silence would break. The invitation was simple. No dramatic wording. No long explanation. Just a quiet message sent at the right time. Housewarming dinner.
This Saturday.
I'd love for you all to come. I stared at the screen for a moment before pressing send. My finger hovered, not because I was unsure, but because I knew what this meant. Once the message was out, there would be no hiding. No more silence. Still, I sent it. The responses came quickly. My mother replied first. A housewarming? Yours? I smiled at the question. Yes, I typed back. There was a pause. Then another message appeared. Oh, that's nice.
Nice.
The word felt light, uncertain, like she didn't quite know where to place it. My father's response came later. We'll come. What time? No questions. No curiosity. Just polite acceptance. My sister responded last. Congratulations. Where is it? Her message was cheerful, full of emojis, but I could feel the curiosity behind it. Maybe even disbelief. She had always known exactly where everyone stood. This time she didn't. The days leading up to Saturday felt strangely calm. I expected nerves. I expected anxiety. But instead, I felt steady, grounded, as if something inside me had already made peace with whatever reaction was coming. I spent the evening before the dinner walking through my home slowly. I didn't rush to perfect anything. I adjusted cushions, cleaned surfaces, and opened the windows to let fresh air in. This place didn't need to perform. It already told my story. I thought about my parents' laughter from years ago, about the certainty in my father's voice, about the way I had swallowed my pain and carried it alone. And for the first time, those memories didn't sting. Saturday arrived quietly. I got ready without overthinking, simple clothes, natural makeup. Nothing meant to impress. As I stood by the door, keys in hand, I felt something close to gratitude. No matter how the evening went, I had already won something important. I had proven to myself that I was capable.
The doorbell rang.
I took a deep breath, walked forward, and opened the door. My parents stood there first, looking around before even stepping inside. Their expressions shifted, from politeness to confusion to something else I couldn't quite name. Behind them, my sister approached, and the moment she looked past me, I knew. This was the beginning of the end of every assumption they had ever made about me. For a moment, no one spoke. My parents stood just inside the doorway, their eyes slowly moving across the space, as if they needed time to understand what they were seeing. The light poured in through wide windows, soft and warm. The room wasn't loud or flashy, but it was intentional.
Calm.
Grounded. My mother took a small step forward. "This is yours?" she asked, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "Yes," I said simply. My father cleared his throat. He looked around again, this time more carefully. At the clean lines, the thoughtful details, the sense of balance. This wasn't a house built to show off, it was built to last. My sister entered behind them. The moment she stepped inside, her smile froze. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked, really looked, at the space. At the way everything fit together. At the feeling of it. I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the silent comparison she had never expected to make. "This doesn't look rented," she said finally, half joking. "It's not," I replied. Silence followed. We walked through the house slowly. The living area, the kitchen, the quiet corners that felt like breathing space. With every step, their expressions changed, not dramatically, but undeniably. My mother touched the kitchen counter, almost absent-mindedly. "You chose all this yourself?" I nodded. She didn't respond right away. My father stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back. He stared outside for a long moment before speaking. "You did this on your own?" There it was. Not praise. Not apology. Just disbelief. "Yes," I said again. My sister laughed softly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't know you were doing so well." "Neither did you ever ask," I thought, but I didn't say it. We sat down to dinner, but the energy had shifted. The room felt heavier now, filled with unspoken thoughts. My parents asked careful questions about timelines, about work, about how long I had been planning this. I answered calmly. No exaggeration. No defensiveness. No need to justify. At one point, my mother looked at me and said, almost to herself, "We didn't realize." Her sentence trailed off. My father didn't speak much after that. He ate quietly, occasionally glancing around the house, as if expecting it to disappear. My sister complimented the design, the layout, the atmosphere. "It's different from mine," she said. "Yes," I replied. "It's meant to be." That was the moment I felt it. Not triumph, not revenge, just closure. I watched them sitting in my space, the space they once believed I would never have, and I realized something important. I didn't need them to admit they were wrong. Their silence already had. When the evening came to an end, there were no confrontations, no dramatic apologies, no long explanations, no raised voices or emotional speeches. And somehow, that made everything more meaningful. My parents stood by the door, preparing to leave. My mother hugged me a little tighter than usual. She didn't say much, just, "Take care of yourself." But her voice was different.
Softer.
Thoughtful. My father paused before stepping outside. He looked around one last time, as if trying to memorize the space. Then he met my eyes. "You did well," he said. 2 simple words. Years ago, I would have waited my whole life to hear them.
I would have needed them.
That night, I accepted them, but I didn't depend on them. My sister hugged me too. "You should have told us," she said lightly. I smiled. I needed to be sure first. After they left, I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. The house was quiet again, peacefully so. The kind of silence that doesn't ache. I walked through the room slowly, turning off lights, touching walls that felt real beneath my fingers. Every corner carried memory, not of luxury, but of resilience. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who sat on the floor of a rented room, wondering if she would ever be enough. The one who learned to survive without being seen. The one who kept going even when no one believed she could. She had made it here, not to prove a point, not to compete, but to reclaim herself. I realized something then. My victory wasn't the house. It was the freedom to define success on my own terms. The strength to move forward without bitterness. The peace that came from knowing I didn't need anyone's permission to build a life I was proud of. That night, as I sat by the window and watched the city lights glow softly outside, I felt something I had never felt before. Contentment. They once laughed and said I would never have a house like my sister's. They were right. I didn't want hers. I wanted mine. And that made all the difference.